Welcome to this explainer. I want you to picture a truly dramatic scene with me. It's about 2.7 million years ago. Our Earth, which had been this wonderfully warm and stable place, suddenly crosses a brutal tipping point. We're talking absolute climatic chaos, throwing our entire planet into a freezing, unpredictable regime. Today, we're exploring the incredible journey of our ancestors together. We'll look at exactly how they survived this intense climate chaos, how they adapted, and how Homo sapiens, us, eventually rose to thrive against all odds.
Okay, let's dive into this. We're breaking this ultimate survival story into 4 crucial chapters. First, extreme climates shaping evolution. Second, the daily life of hunter-gatherers. Third, sapiens versus Neanderthals. And finally, high-altitude hunting strategies.
Chapter 1. Extreme Climates Shaping Evolution, the Pleistocene Climate Chaos. This right here is the ultimate planet-sized problem our ancestors had to solve. To really ground us in the vast scale of prehistoric time, we have to start 2.7 million years ago. That was the initial tipping point where our ancestors were literally forced to adapt or die. Then, fast forward to about 70,000 years ago, human populations shrank massively, basically creating a genetic bottleneck thanks to the catastrophic Toba volcanic eruption. And then, at the 30,000-year mark, our evolutionary cousins, the Neanderthals, go completely extinct. These aren't just dates, they are the absolute defining do-or-die moments of human evolution.
So what exactly made the Pleistocene era so incredibly brutal? Well, it essentially comes down to something called Dansgaard-Oeschger cycles. Don't let the complex name fool you. It just means rapid, chaotic swings in global climate. Imagine the Earth shifting wildly from freezing ice ages to warm interglacial periods roughly every 1,500 years. It was a flickering, extreme environment. This wiped out species that were ecological specialists. To survive, hominins had to stop relying on just one specific environment. We had to evolve into highly versatile, adaptable generalists. It was this sheer, terrifying unpredictability that essentially forced our brains to become the ultimate problem-solving machines.
That brings us to Chapter 2, the daily life of hunter-gatherers, adapting to the wild. This is the adaptation phase of our story. So the crucial point is this: minimizing material possessions and resisting social hierarchy weren't just random cultural quirks. They were brilliant, active survival strategies. Think about it. If you constantly have to pack up and move camp because the seasons shift or the food suddenly runs out, hoarding a bunch of wealth is only going to slow you down. They maintained a strict egalitarian ethos. Resources were completely shared, which meant that when a hunting trip inevitably failed, and they did fail a lot, nobody in the group starved. And this makes perfect sense when we look at their daily routines. The division of labor was incredibly flexible, driven entirely by pure pragmatism. You had aging adults watching the children while digging up tubers near the camp. Talk about a fantastic social safety net, right? Kids pitched in by foraging for fruit. And as for gender roles, they weren't nearly as rigid as we often assume. Ethnographic data from modern foraging societies, like the Batek people in Malaysia, shows us this amazing flexibility, where men might gather rattan fibers while the women are out hunting wild bamboo rats. Surviving a chaotic world demanded adaptability, not strict roles. Now, we absolutely have to talk about one of our greatest breakthroughs, the mastery of fire. This was a real game changer. Cooking allowed hominins to consume and digest starches in a fraction of the time it would take to eat them raw. Why does that matter? Because hunting large game was incredibly risky. Fire acted as this amazing technological buffer. It literally allowed our ancestors to trade long, energy-draining digestive tracts for massive, energy-hungry brains, all while relying on cooked tubers as a totally dependable fallback when the hunters came home empty-handed. Moving right along to Chapter 3, Sapiens versus Neanderthals, the clash of human species. This is where the competition really heats up. The physical contrast between these two cousins is just striking. Neanderthals, they were built like prehistoric tanks, shorter, stockier, with 20% more lung capacity. This was a biological design perfectly suited for retaining body heat in the Ice Age and launching close-quarters ambushes in dense, dark European forests. Sapiens, on the other hand, were built completely differently. We had tall, lithe bodies with long legs and shoulders specifically evolved for throwing. We were built for crossing wide-open savannas, exhausting our prey through endurance running, and striking from a very safe distance.
Now, what's really fascinating about this data is that these physical differences extended into incredible cognitive and social advantages.
The sapiens' brain, particularly the upper parietal lobe, evolved to maintain complex mental models of people who weren't even in the room with them. The result is huge. While Neanderthals lived in very small, isolated groups, sapiens were out there building massive trade routes stretching over 400 kilometers. When resources ran thin, an average sapiens had about 189 extra individuals they could call on for help compared to a Neanderthal. That vast, interconnected social network was literally our ultimate safety net.
But hey, it wasn't always a deadly rivalry. Actually, 1 to 4% of the DNA carried by many modern human populations outside of Africa today comes directly from Neanderthals. So instead of just competing, we also interbred with them. And this was a massive win for us. It instantly gave sapiens vital genetic adaptations that Neanderthals had spent thousands of years slowly developing, like a built-in resistance to hypoxia, which is absolutely crucial for living at high altitudes.
And that leads us perfectly into Chapter 4, High-Altitude Hunting Strategies, the Geographic Advantage. Let's look at how we actually outcompeted them in the field.
Let's see how this builds step by step, because tactically, sapiens systematically dominated the landscape. First, they positioned their settlements high up on elevated ridges. Second, from these amazing vantage points, they could just survey the landscape for miles, tracking migratory herds without burning any energy. And third, once they had a solid plan, they descended and struck using those projectile weapons from a completely safe distance. It was highly organized and incredibly efficient.
Contrast that with the Neanderthals. Archaeological artifacts show they live down in low-lying valleys. Down there, your visibility to the horizon is severely restricted. You can't see what's coming. So they had to rely on ambush tactics, literally jumping out of the brush to wrestle and thrust spears into massive, dangerous prey at extremely close range. When they were forced to compete with sapiens for the exact same food, this lack of visibility, combined with the incredibly high rate of fatal injuries from close-quarters hunting, heavily contributed to their extinction 30,000 years ago. Mastering geography combined with our throwing anatomy simply gave sapiens the ultimate edge. So, I want to leave you with a deeply provocative thought. What if the roles were reversed? If Neanderthals had been the ones to conquer the high ground and survey the horizon, would they be the ones who survived? The reality that our survival as a species was so heavily influenced by a simple change in geographic positioning, a wider circle of friends, and unpredictable climate swings, well, it shows us just how fragile, lucky, and totally astonishing the journey of Homo sapiens really is. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep feeding that curiosity, and I'll catch you next time.